Hello, this is Jim McKeith, and welcome to this developer skill sprint, effective live bindings from forms to code. For the replay, resources, and more information, check out the blog notes link down at the bottom, embt.co/sprint-livebindings. This skill sprint works across all platforms with all of our tools and in all of our developer languages. Agenda, we're going to do an overview of live bindings. We're going to talk about custom expressions, and we're going to look at live bindings from code. So that's binding objects built in code to user interface elements. We'll have a few samples and we'll give you some resources. For those of you new to live bindings are a simple way to connect data to display user interface elements. So this can be data from a database, data from a REST service, data defined in code, or any form of data, connecting just two components together. All of this can be done through live bindings. This is done by creating expressions, and those expressions define how data interacts with user interface elements, and they're evaluated at runtime. So the components that are used for live bindings, the main one is the T-bindings list. This holds all the bindings and expressions. So as soon as you create live bindings, one of these T-bindings list is added to your form automatically. You don't typically need to add one on your own. If you're binding to a database, you'll get a T-bind source DB. And if you're binding to non-database elements, so for example, binding to code, you would use a T adapter bind source. You'd add that manually. You can also use a T prototype bind source. It provides you with some data at design time, some dummy data that you can use. The T data generator adapter is used with the adapter bind source to provide some, generate some data for you to fill up at design time. And then the bind navigator is the DB navigator-like component that comes down that has the next and back and commit and buttons like that to navigate through sets of data. So let's go ahead and do some live bindings demonstrations. So I'll show you a quick overview of live bindings and how to work with expressions. This is a brand new C++ multi-device application, and I'm just going to drop down a track bar and a circle. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the track bar to move the circle. So down here, our live binding designer, our track bar has a value, but our circle has nothing to bind to. But if we just tap on the ellipsis here, we can bring up a list of all the properties and find position X. And okay, this adds it to the list. So now we can bind it. As soon as we do that, this drops down our bindings list, which is the component that contains all of our bindings. So we'll go ahead and run this. And as we move our track bar, our circle moves. Although it's kind of disappointing because the circle doesn't line up with the track bar track. That seems, like how you'd want it to behave. Now the reason is because the track bar doesn't go all the way to the end, and also the track bar has a max value, where's max? Right there, of 100, but its width is much higher than 100. So it doesn't exactly map. So we're mapping the value, which is from 0 to 100 to this, which is going to keep it just a little bit of movement there. But we can fix that with live bindings. First of all, let's show you in here in the live bindings list. This is the binding we've created. So if you notice when I select in here, you watch down at the bottom, see how it gets highlighted? So that means that's the binding. That's selected that binding. I can select it from here. I can select it from the bindings list. I can go into the track bar itself and find the live bindings in here and select the live binding. And this is that live binding there. So there's a few different ways you can get to it to edit it. But first of all, let's show you, we can actually create this manually. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And we'll create a new live binding. We'll create a link control to a property. And the component is circle1. And the property is position X. So we can hit the drop down list and select from there, but in this case, we're just going to type it in manually. And the control that we're linking to is the track bar. At this point, we've recreated that live binding again. So let's redraw the arrow down here at the bottom, and everything's ready to go. Now, let's modify this to make it work where the so the circle lines up with the ellipse, the track. Right here on custom format, this is where we're going to put in our expression that is going to modify the values that are passed back and forward. So we can take value, which is the value of the track bar, and multiply that by the width of the track bar divided by max. So this is going to take the width and divide it by the max and should give us a movement that's going to be similar to, so there we go there, it's moving at the same ratio as the track bar thumb. But again, it's not lined up because this is 0 here. But we can fix that by adding to it the position .x. So this is the position .x of the track bar. But to really get this fine-tuned down, we can subtract, and this time we'll go owner dot circle 1 dot width divided by 2. And so by going to owner, we're going to go up from the track bar to the form, get circle 1, and get its width divided by 2. And that way it'll line up so it's perfectly centered over the thumb. There we go. We see it's perfectly lined up, perfectly centered over the thumb at both ends. There. And that's done. We've created a custom expression. Now, this is just scratched the surface of what you can do with custom expressions. If you come in here to the bindings list, the methods right here lists all of the methods that you can invoke in a custom expression. And if you look at this, there's quite a bit you can do here in this list. There's if-then expressions where you can say if-then. So you say if this is true, then return this, otherwise return this. You can check state. There's selected date time, lookups, all sorts of things you can do here from this. And this list is extensible. You can actually create your own methods that get added to this list. So very powerful what you can do here with this. Also, there's converters in here that will convert values for you as you need to. And again, this list is also extensible as well. So let's just really scratch the surface of what you can do with LiveBindings Designer, and expressions. So now let's look at how to bidirectionally bind objects that we've generated in code with, in this case, a grid. So in order to do this, we use the adapter bind source. You can get that from the object inspector, put it down on your form, and I've just bound this to the grid. Now, in our create adapter event, we're going to go ahead and create a list of objects. Now, our objects are just objects we defined here. It's a T person. And we're creating a list, an object list of persons, and we're putting in populating with the Adams family. And then we just take the a bind source adapter, which is passed into us, and we give it, in this case, we're giving a list, so it's in a T list bind source adapter, and it's going to be a list of people. And self means this adapter is going to be owned by our form because we're within the scope of our form, and we pass in the list of people, and we tell it it owns the object, which is the default. At that point, we've bound this up, so we can run this now. And we see our people, first name, last name, and age. Now, at design time, we have nothing to see here. Now, the solution to that is we can put down a data generator adapter, and a data generator adapter is going to generate some data for us. Now, I've already gone ahead and added in some fields here, first name, last name, and age, and just used some of the generators that are built into this. And so once we've put this down here on the form, this is going to have the fields for it. And we can just come in here and select our adapter. And now come in here and activate it. And we have our data at design time. So this gives me the option to come in here now, and I can say columns editor, add all those columns in, and then I can customize these columns. For example, let's say I want to make this one 80 and last name will make it 100. So it gives me the run design time visualization of the columns, which makes it easier to do design time work. But as soon as I run it, it replaces that one with the adapter that's generated in code. Now, one last thing here, this is bidirectional. So in order to demonstrate that, I have a tab here that's a JSON tab. And what this does is just serializes that list collection into JSON. And then when we go back, it goes back again. So if, let's say, Gomez Adams decides that he wants to change the way he spells his last name to just Adams. There, like that. So once I move off of it, it's posted it back now to that object. And to show that to you, when I tip over to the JSON tab, we can see here that Gomez Adams is now spelt with one D. So here we can come and edit Morticia and change hers, and we'll change Pugsley and Wednesday as well to the 1D spelling. And when I come back, we can see that these are now updated with the 1D Adams instead of the 2D Adams. Okay, so great example of how this binding to visual components is done bidirectionally. So I can make changes. So I'll make one more change here. We'll change Lurch to Butler. And again, we'll step off of that so that it posts it back to it. And we come back in here and we see there's Lurch with a first name of Butler again. Okay, so very cool, very easy to do. Actually, I'll show you the code behind the serialization, deserialization. When we change to the JSON tab, I just turn object to JSON string, post it the memo. And when we come back, I create a new people list, which is just a collection of those new people that we've gotten back. We clear the old list and add it back again. If we replaced the fMyPeople with new people, or with the object that comes back, that's going to make a whole new object. And since the binding is to the reference and not to the name, then we'll have two different references and they won't line up. So we just clear the list and put it back again. You could go through and update the individual objects if you wanted to in the list, but this was much easier for the simple demos purposes. There's a number of other samples that are available as well. This one here, this list collection sample, has a lot more complex examples of how you might bind up objects generated in code to visual representation. So here's a test collection, here's a JSON array, here's a list of integers, etc. So you can take a look at that code to see more about that. This one here is kind of interesting as well. The one of each component, it's a VCL example. And this just shows some different binding examples. So binding expression items, T-bind positions. This is similar here. We use the scroll bar to move, and again, it's bidirectional. As I select items here, here's a grid with a DB navigator. So all sorts of great cool stuff you can do here with LiveBindings. So check those out as well. For more information, you can check out these samples here. They're all available for Object Pascal only right now. There's the list collections, which shows you a whole bunch of different ways to bind user-defined lists to LiveBindings. Then there's the general LiveBindings examples here, which shows binding to grid, binding to edit controls, etc. If you want the code that I showed in the example of bidirectional list of objects to a grid using the T-adapter bind source, you can get it at the blog notes link, embt.co/sprint-livebindings. There's lots of information in the doc wiki, so I've provided a few useful links here. For an overview of LiveBindings, you can check out those links. For information on LiveBindings methods, there's some good resources for you there. And to more information on custom formatter and custom parse expressions, you can check out that last link there. Lots of blog posts covering LiveBindings. First one I'm pointing out to you here is Jim Tierney. He wrote LiveBindings, or most of LiveBindings, and has a lot of blog posts just about LiveBindings. So to learn from the master, check it out there. Malcolm Groves has a number of great blog posts on LiveBindings as well. There's one there that shows the T-adapter bind source, goes into a little more detail than I went into. And also you can check out all his blog posts tagged with LiveBindings with that second link. Serena DuPont also has a number of LiveBindings blog posts, but this one here shows you how to do sorting with LiveBindings. And Rodrigo Ruz at the Road to Delphi has one on evaluating compiling expressions. The fmxexpress.com has a collection of various LiveBindings resources you can check out from as well, linking to some of the blog posts you see above as well as others. Coming soon is a whole new series of skill sprints. We've taken your suggestions and some of the new features in RAD Studio Seattle and created a new series of skill sprints. These will kick off on Tuesday, the 20th of October. You'll be able to register in the near future at embt.co/sprints15 with an uppercase S. Before those skill sprints start, though, we have Code Rage 10. This is October 13th through the 15th. 3 full days, 12 hours each day, 2 tracks, 72 amazing sessions. You can check out the current Delphi tracks there or the C++ tracks. This is a free technical conference full of sessions by industry and product experts, tips and tricks, and lots of great information about mobile development and the Internet of Things. Register now at thecoderage.com. I'll tell you about some of the special offers we have going on right now for RAD Studio 10 Seattle. These special offers end September 30th. You can buy one, get a second tool for free. You get early bird discount, saving 10% if you buy before the 30th. Also, you can upgrade from any earlier version and get upgrade pricing, savings up to 45%. And this doesn't require update subscription. You can get the free RAD bonus pack, which includes more coding in Delphi, Object Pascal Handbook, VCL and FireMonkey Premium Styles, and the MIDA Converter Basic. For more information on these special offers, check out embarcadero.com/radoffer. We also have a variety of other tools for developers, so these would be things you could use with your buy one, get one offer. We have the App Analytics solution, which lets you understand your users wherever they are, integrates easily into your application so you can see what your users are doing and how they're doing it. Beacon Fencing provides a beacon fencing proximity solution in your applications. We have the brand new Kanopka Signature Controls. This is the premier VCL user interface control suite for Windows. CodeSite for VCL and .NET provides live, local, and remote application logging. Interbase is the multi-device database, zero administration, tiny footprint, every platform, tons of fabulous features, very fast, great encryption. I could go on for hours on Interbase. Awesome database. More products available there at embarcadero.com/products. Right now, we also have our RAD solution pack for VCL and FireMonkey. This is over $6,000 value of components. The tools you use as a developer, all bundled up in one package, easy to get with a bundle discount. You can get it in VCL, FireMonkey, or combined VCL and FireMonkey packs, and it includes source code when available. Check out their embt.co/rad solution pack. And now it's time for Q&A. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to get a hold of me, there's my email address and my Twitter handle. Most importantly, check out the blog notes, embt.co/sprint-livebindings for slides, eventual replay, and all the resource links.
So Alf is asking if there says sometimes it's kind of messy with all the components on there for LiveBindings. And actually, I meant to show this in Totally Space doing it. If you use Control H in Seattle, it'll hide all your non-visual controls, and then Control H again brings them back. So if you're working with LiveBindings or anything else with non-visual components, you don't have to worry. If they get in your way, Control H, boom, they're all gone. Control H again brings them back. So that's a real time saver, I think. And also there's some other questions about when you have a more complex form, maybe with a tab with multiple, a tablet or a tab page with multiple tabs, etc. What you can do to organize your LiveBindings better is in the LiveBindings designer you can set up layers, and so you could have some of your you could, for example, put the LiveBindings for each tab in a different layer. And another level of work you can do to isolate the LiveBindings is actually divide your form up into logical segments, and then put each of those in a frame, and then combine those frames together. So for example, let's say you have a tab control again. You could put each tab in its own frame, and then put the frames in the tab control, and then all the live bindings for each individual tab, all the visual, non-visual components, etc., would all automatically be divided up onto the separate frames. So that's a good way to do it as well. You can have more than one binding list control if you want to as well, and set that up that way. By default, it just uses the one, but you can manually add a second one. Honestly, I think the best way, if you're wanting to divide up the complexity of live bindings in a more complex form, I think frames is probably the best way to do that. Are you saying you can't have custom styles within the frame? Or, because I believe the style from the form gets applied to all the frames that are on that form. I know I've used them and seen custom styles before, so I haven't looked at it specifically, so I'm not sure exactly what your concern is about styles on frames. But the style, I believe the style on the form gets applied to the frames. I'm almost positive of that. And Alf's asking if frames have gotten better since Delphi 2006. Yeah, there was a big improvement. I believe it was XE4 or XE5, maybe XE3, sometime around there, that there was a big improvement to frames, and they work quite nicely now. So there's a question here about the Kanopka controls. That's a separate item. It's not a free upgrade as far part as buying Seattle. So Seattle, you get the free bonus pack. And then the Kanopka signature controls, let me look at what that's called. It's called the
RAD Solution Pack, but you can purchase them separately, and the Kanopka controls is one of the buy one, get one free choices if you upgrade your product to 10 Seattle, but it is a separate product, and it has its own update subscription as well, if you want to keep updated in new releases over a 12-month period.
Yeah, so I guess if you're on subscription, then you don't qualify for the buy one get one. With subscription, you get a much steeper discount on the new version Seattle. So if you were subscribed previously and you got Seattle at you get it for free, and you have to renew your subscription. You don't get the buy one get one. That's a separate promotion.
Choose all the other products that Jim mentioned. You can purchase those and add update subscription for each of those. Each of those are separate products, whether it's Code Studio, Kanopka controls, and so on. Or better is go for the RAD Solution Pack. You get a whole bunch of whole set of VCL controls and services, or FireMonkey's controls and services, or you can have the total bundle pack, which is all the VCL and FireMonkey, and all of that is on the RAD Solution Pack page.
Right, yeah, so get the solution pack with update subscription, and then you'll have it all going forward. So Al's asking if the T-Chart Pro contains the source code like T-Tree. I'm not sure if it specifically contains source code. If you look on the RAD Solution page, it might have it. If not, you can check with sales, and they can affiliate on the details on which ones contain source. Okay, I think that's it for questions. If you're having other questions, go ahead and put them in the question window and go to webinar software, and we'll get them in there for you. Hopefully everybody is on the holiday is registered for Code Rage. Code Rage is going to be excellent. We're ironing out some of the details for the sessions right now still, so schedule, getting different things on there, but it's looking really, really good right now. There's a lot of great content. And it's going to be 3 days, 12 hours a day, 2 sessions. I did the math, 72 sessions. Wow, it's just crazy. And actually, there's so much content that we couldn't get it all into the Object Pascal track. So some of the stuff on the C++ track will actually be Object Pascal related, Delphi related as well, just because we can't get it all on one track. So you're going to want it to catch some of the replays because you can't be in both rooms at the same time. So Enrico's asking, he says, I'm going to raise customers. Is it possible to make an upgrade to new Kanopka pack? Yes, it is. Go to I'm not sure if it's on the page for Kanopka signature controls, or if you can, I think it's on our shop site though. If you are a previous version of Raise software, you can upgrade to the current version and get update subscription so that you'll have updates to his controls going forward, new versions. So yeah, check that out. we do have the upgrade option available. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed the session on live bindings. I didn't actually, I realized after the fact I didn't show live binding a data set to a grid. I've shown that, 100 times in other skill sprints and other demos and such. So that's the default thing we use it for, is live binding data sets to grids, but you can do so much more with it. And so that's kind of what I wanted to focus on today, is some of the things that you don't realize you can do with live bindings, but that you can. And you can combine the stuff I showed you today with your data sets and really take live binding to the next level. And you're welcome. Thank you for joining us today. So there's a question here if you can define and select the columns at runtime instead of at design time. So I'm assuming that means for in the grid. So yeah, you can actually do that. There's I don't think there's a method to say add all the columns to the grid. Well, it does by default, puts all the columns in the grid. But if you want to be able to customize them, you can go into the columns collection and modify them from there. So I believe it's just called, it's grid.columns is the name is the collection, and you can access individual columns from there and resize them or change characteristics of those columns.
I mean, everything you see in live bindings you do at design time, you can do in code. You can actually do bindings and binding objects, doing calculations. There's events you can hook. I mean, everything you can do at design time. I think you mentioned it, Jim. If you want to have your own custom code for calculations, we have talks on live bindings from past code rages where you wanted to maybe do a special process based on a value that was being bound. You wanted to change the color of a circle or whatever. You can create your own methods and register them with the live binding system. Jim showed the built-in methods that are available, but there's documentation and samples for creating your own live binding methods and having them appear on that list of methods that you can use in expressions.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, there's some of the links point to resources on how to do exactly that. So it's really, really extensible what you can do with live bindings. And the list, I can't remember exactly what it's called, list something samples that I showed. There's the 3 samples that are the bindings one, and there's one that's like list collections or something like that. That one shows how to do it all through code. None of it's done at design time. Although it has a factory, so you have to look at the way the factory works. But anyway, you can, like David said, you can do it all through code as well that you can do at design time. Are live bindings more efficient at runtime than hard coding via events? So because there are some things, so live bindings has some optimizations in it, but because live bindings are evaluated at runtime, there can be a little bit of overhead there. In most cases, it's not a big deal. For example, if you're doing a mobile app with a list view and you're live binding a data set, it's plenty fast. But if you have 500 individual user interface elements on a Windows form and you're scrolling through it, you might see some overhead there because each individual live binding has to be evaluated. So the more live bindings you have on a form, you could see some overhead there. Generally, it's not going to be as big a big impact, but there could be some overhead. But that being said, there are if optimizations within live bindings, for example, like in binding to a list view or a grid, that are more efficient than probably what the default you would get from code. So if you're going to have it be scrollable, live bindings are great for that. But if you're binding to 500 or hundreds of user interface elements, you may end up seeing a little bit of slowdown there compared to what you could do directly from code. So Jens is saying a bit overwhelmed where to start from scratch. There's some, let's see, if you're not familiar at all with live bindings, it's really quite easy to do. I think the doc wiki has some getting started with live bindings. That's probably what I would start from, is the doc wiki. The blog posts are really more of the, like, how to do something, more details on how to do specific things with live bindings. So you start with the doc wiki, and you can go through there for live bindings. But the basic stuff with live bindings is really simple. You just you can, if I didn't even show the live bindings wizard, there's a link in the doc wiki that explains it. But if you right-click on your form, say bind visually, and then on the left-hand side, those little magic wand symbol, you just tap that, and they'll bring up the live bindings wizard and walk you through the process of binding a data set. So if you have a data set on your form you want to bind to a grid, it'll do all that for you. and I put my phone on silent, but it's still making noise. Phones. Okay, sorry about that. How does LiveBindings fit with the MVC philosophy? Is it possible to offload the LiveBindings to a data module, for example? Yes, you can. So it really depends on how you want to look at MVC or MVVM. Malcolm Groves has a blog post on MVVM and LiveBindings that you can take a look at. So yes, it does fit with that. More MVVM than MVC, and you, depending on how you want to debate the differences between the two patterns, it may apply to MVC as well. So you can put some of it in the data module. Some of it, though, I think, I'm trying to remember which one it is. I think the binding list needs to remain on the form with the visual controls, but the other things can be on the data module, the other parts, the ones that bind it to the data set. Think here. If you consider that the form is the separate, is the the view model, then you actually, it's a separate layer, right? So you say the code is one layer, the form's a separate layer with the bindings list defining the where everything's connected, and then the data is separate. So depending on how you want to slice it up, there's lots of options there. What about performance using large data? I believe the only place you're going to see performance issues are if you have a lot of bindings. If you have a single, if you have a grid, for example, just like with a billion rows in the grid, and you're only displaying 5 columns, for example, it's going to be really fast. But if you have 1,000 columns and a billion rows, well, it's the columns that are going to slow you down, just because it has to deal with each of those individually. Again, and likewise, if you have 100 edit controls in your form. Now, performance is one of those things. It's really hard to give general guidelines about performance, because for some, if I say LiveBindings is plenty fast, you can find a situation where it's going to be slower. And if I say code's faster than LiveBindings, you can find a situation where LiveBindings is faster. Generally speaking, the more LiveBindings you have, the more individual bindings you have, the slower it's going to be, generally speaking. So test it, but for most situations, LiveBindings is plenty fast. And yeah, depends on how you define large data. So what do you mean? There's a question here about LiveBindings with scripted live forms. I'm not sure what exactly you mean by scripted live forms, but you can do everything in LiveBindings in code without you doing it in the designer. So I would assume you should be able to do it no problem. And also, there's a there's questions here that some of the LiveBindings blog posts and videos were several versions ago. Is the current LiveBindings much different? So I'm trying to remember when LiveBindings was introduced, but I know in XE3 it received a really big overhaul, and I think since then we've mostly seen just some incremental improvements and optimizations and bug fixes.
Yeah, there's been, I mean, it's very crystal clear how it was implemented, how it's documented. Maybe there's been some bug fixes, some enhancements. There was when it first came out, it was the way to do data binding when FireMonkey came out. It was the only way you could do it. And then we extended that binding mechanism to VCL as well. So, and ever since then, there's been little tweaks. There would, the first version, you had to sort of trigger doing rebinding in the bind tree, the infrastructure underneath, and that was updated so you didn't have to care anymore that it was all happening in a background thread, the firing of expressions and bindings to whatever you're binding with, the UI control, a grid, or something else. So there hasn't been really anything to do other than there's been some suggestions. I think there was even one this morning about other ways of doing things in the LiveBindings designer maybe having different pages where you could do your binding diagrams versus using the layers. So we'll pass that along to product management, but it's very easy. It uses the similar drawing mechanism that we use for UML modeling, so under the covers. So there's lots of functionality and ways of doing diagrams on different tabs or different pages, but for now we use this layering approach where you can identify which bindings you care about when you have very large binding operations. But at the same time, if you find yourself having very complicated LiveBindings diagrams in the Visual LiveBinding Designer, to me it says you're putting too much into a single unit and form.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yep.
It's just, I start thinking about that now. Some people will say, well, I've got to have all these on a form because I can't sequence people through multiple forms, so I'm using multiple tab controls. And now in FireMonkey RAD Studio 10 Seattle, you can have scrolling tabs in a tab control. So you really pack a whole bunch of stuff that way, and to keep people in the same form, right, in that same window. So I can see that it can get complicated. At the same time, think about your poor users if they've got so many tabs and so many user interface controls and they're scrolling up and down, or they have to get really large screens. It just cries out for thinking to how to separate the UI into different parts and do the bindings on each of those forms rather than on one big form. I can't imagine hundreds or thousands of UI controls on a form or a grid that had so many columns that somebody was scrolling like crazy to get way over. But
and if you do have situations where
that kind of stuff too, but
I was going to say, if you do have situations where you have your LiveBindings is getting complicated, there's two things you can do to improve that. In the upper right-hand corner of the LiveBindings Designer, you can create new layers, and you can put different LiveBindings in different layers as a way to isolate that and keep that easier to work with. But you can also, if you have a situation where you have multiple tabs, is instead of putting the objects right on the tab on that form, instead put them in a frame and then embed the frame in that tab, and then that keeps it all separated. It's all isolated in that separate frame, and then you're splitting out into separate units, and you're making your code a lot more modular and easier to work with and easier to maintain. So even if you're not doing LiveBindings, if you have complicated frames or complicated tabs, instead of putting them right on the tab, put them in a frame instead, and that will really improve your ability to maintain your project.
they were asking if you could undock the LiveBinding Designer, and the answer is yes, you can undock the LiveBinding Designer.
Yeah, Seattle has a lot of multi-monitor improvements. There was a screenshot from R&D where someone had 4 monitors and their IDE was spread across all 4 monitors. I'm like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, we're all still waiting for separating out code and design, right? That's the next evolution of the IDE, is being able to have code editors and the form designer on different monitors and different parts of the screen. So we're all cheering that on. It's on the list of things to be done in the future. So I think when we have that, other than 64-bit IDE or IDE running on different operating systems, I mean, the undocking code and form is a really good thing.
Yep, and so that we have a huge R&D team that keeps growing, and they're all use and love Delphi, and so a lot of them are giving the same feedback about undocking and multi-monitors and stuff like that. So it's definitely being addressed. Breaking into multiple forms, because it's using T-multi-view. I would say use frames, not forms. I know some people like using frames, but if you use forms, I think you'll get better. Frames, multiple frames, and then embed the frames. You should be able to do that in the T-multi-view. I'm not sure why you wouldn't be able to. I'm trying to think Yeah, you should be able to do that, no problem. So if you're running into something specific with frames, do let me know.
I mean, you can also parent forms onto all sorts of things. I mean, you can parent a form with a button. I mean, in FireMonkey, you can parent a form to a form to a. But I mean, these are all abstractions, so you have to think about, what is it you're trying to accomplish for your users are using the multi-view for a sort of master detail kind of thing, or is it a navigation side with different parts in the container? Again, I always think about, okay, what user interface paradigm am I trying to accomplish for my users? And then that leads me to what components I should use versus saying, well, gee, I like the multi-view and the little pop-out, pop-out, slide-in, slide-out drawer and that kind of thing. Let's see what I can do to fit that, my application into that kind of paradigm. So,
yeah.
But I mean, you can, again, on the view side versus the navigation side of a multi-view, you can, again, put whatever you want. You can even create objects on the fly in code that might be forms or might be a form with a frame or a tap controller or whatever. But then you're getting into that world of sort of dynamic runtime programming of user interfaces, and some people do that through form descriptors, maybe an XML of some kind. I visited a company in India a couple of years back. They had a single application, and then they had XML descriptors for all these different forms. They were a company that had, I don't know, it was 1,000 or so keyboardists keying in paper invoices for all these different companies that wanted to electronic convert all this paper work that was scanned. And so they just, when they got a new form, they created another XML descriptor, and they just could load, company X form 275, whatever it was, and it loaded it up, the scanned image on one monitor and the input form for Delphi on the other one. They never actually designed forms. They defined XML descriptors that created the form in the exact image so that it looked like the scanned paper form on the other monitor, and then they had at least two people, maybe sometimes more, doing the keyboarding, and it was matching up to make sure there weren't any typos. So they never actually created any forms at design time.
Wow, that's
they had like 1,000 keyboard entry people, and they had like 30 Delphi programmers that just spent their time, refining the system and then working on the form descriptors. It was when they first walked in, I thought, wow, you got 1,000 programmers. And they said, no, go over to this conference room. And that's, their app just snapped to the right thing based on these descriptors. So
I've actually worked on systems before that did a lot of automatic generation. I actually built a system that was in Delphi that was COM objects that would read a XML file, and then generate the user interface elements based on the XML file. So yeah, that's cool stuff. Are there visual enhancements to LiveBindings that are planned? Not that I know of.
I asked, hey, what do you want? Do you want more little icons? I mean, when you're in LiveBindings and you're trying to bind something that can be bound, then it puts the little circle slash. I know there's that area where you showed in one of your examples, Jim, where you have the object with the ... and
right.
Then you have to go in and say, okay, I want the X position or whatever. Why do you have to click on the ... Why not hover over that object and have it show that list, and you could select one, and then you don't have to click. You just hover. But I mean, if there's lists that people have, send those along, and we'll pass them along to the LiveBindings team that do the UI parts over in our St. Petersburg office.
Yeah. This is a question. He's saying it's more like OpenWire, which is a cool technology, but they're different. I mean, OpenWire is your full programmable interface, whereas LiveBindings is really just about data bindings. I mean, it's a little more than that, as I was showing, but I don't know that we'll improve it to be more like OpenWire. So if you do have any other questions, feel free to poke them into the question area in the GoToWebinar software. Poke is a technical term for putting something into a place in memory. It remembers back to those days. Let's see. There is a question here. What is the proper way of binding a combination of two sources to one target control? For example, concatenating text from two edit boxes into a single label. You can actually do that be via format command, similar to what I showed, and I linked to a video that David made back in XE3 time. And actually, I was just thinking about that video links to, or shows concatenating two fields from a data set into one label or one edit box. But you could do the same thing.
Yesterday. Yeah.
You could do the same thing if you use like the example I showed where you go owner dot, then you could go and pull a separate edit box. So you could say you would concatenate edit box, or you link edit box 1 to edit box to label 1, and then in the format you would reference owner dot edit box 2 dot text and put that in there as well. So that would be, there's not a property way to reference it, but you could do it through the owner dot and get to the other edit box. So that would work. One thing about that is it is design time, or is runtime evaluated, and so if you change the name of your other edit box, you won't know that until runtime when it evaluates that and says, whoa, this edit box doesn't exist anymore. So here's a question, why a new language in the format area? Why not callouts to user code? You can actually define your own methods. I mentioned that when I showed the method list, and the links to DocWiki go over how to define your own methods and add those in there. You could make the format expression be a copy of Object Pascal, but I think that would be overkill for what what needs to be done there. So I find the expression language easy to work with. I mean, it makes sense, but yeah, it's not exactly Object Pascal. And again, because LiveBindings works the same across C++ or Object Pascal, are you going to have a different expression language depending on what code you're using behind the scenes? So it's not overly complicated. It's not like you need to learn a whole new language. I think it's very expressive and very makes good sense. How much has LiveBindings improved since XE7? Yeah, I think it's just mostly little bug fixes and little optimizations along the way. I don't think there hasn't been any huge overhauls, I believe, since XE3, but there have been numerous optimizations and improvements, especially as we added the new platforms, Android and iOS. There were some optimizations in how LiveBindings bound to list views and stuff like that in order to make them scroll nicely. So that's been improved, but as far as architectural changes or overhauls, there hasn't been anything major.
Well, Jim, this is a great last skill sprint for this round, and everybody register for Code Rage 10. It's let's see, 36. Is that right? 36. That's 72 skill sprints in 3 days for Object Pascal C++.
Yep. And not
think of it that way, 3 days of skill sprints.
Yep, and there's some sessions that are unique to the C++ track or Object Pascal track, so
yep.
It's
that's a lot of skill sprints actually extended because they're 30 to 45 minutes instead of the 15 to 20 minutes here. So
twice as long.
Yeah.
So that makes it 144 skill sprints.
I don't know. I can't do the math. It's been a long time. So. Okay, everyone, thanks for joining us, and we will see you at Code Rage 10. That'll be the next big get-together, October 13th to 15th, and then Jim's working on the schedule and presenters for starting the week after Code Rage if we survive Code Rage. Okay, everybody. Take care.
All right. Bye.